Nip It Away Dharma Talks.
Talk 12, 28th October 2012. Right Speech. Professor Geoffrey Hunt talks about mindful speaking and mindful listening.
Today we're going to talk about mindfulness of speaking and listening. We may still have the idea that meditation is largely about sitting on a cushion in silence and focusing on the breathing, which it is. That's development of concentration. But it's more than that in the tradition of Buddha meditation. It's about developing mindfulness. And mindfulness is about deploying our attention in a very focused way on any aspect of our experience in order to challenge its very nature, which will help us to dissolve the ego and be closer to everything around us and see into our true nature. So we can take anything and everything as an object of mindfulness. Now you may remember the Noble Eightfold Path, which is right understanding and right intention, and then it has three parts which appear to have to do with our behavior: right speech, right action, right livelihood, and then another three parts which appear to have to do with something separate called meditation practice, which is right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. But really it's all one. The Buddha doesn't teach ethics or morality as something separate from everything else. You do see this sometimes presented in certain books or teachings as though the Buddha is also teaching ordinary people to behave themselves, whereas with the monks he's teaching concentration and mindfulness. Of course, for a harmonious society, we do need to have certain norms of behavior so that we can cooperate and live in peace. But in the Buddhist teaching, it's something more than this. For example, if you take speaking, we all know that we could speak rudely, harshly, deceitfully, and we know that generally that's not a good thing. We all know that, and in fact, every moral and religious teaching in the world teaches that. And you might say, well, the Buddha teaches it as well. But there is something beyond that understanding of speaking carefully and non-harmfully, which is in the Buddha's teaching. And that is that speaking itself is an object of mindfulness. So when I'm speaking and listening, I'm aware of how I'm speaking and how I'm listening. So we're actually taking our behavior as another opportunity to develop our wisdom and compassion and live peacefully and with deep insight. So you can see that he's going a step further than just giving a set of rules, such as don't tell lies. But now let's focus on this idea of what is sometimes called right speech. Now when the Buddha says right, or when his followers say right, they don't mean right as opposed to wrong as we understand it in the Western world. What it means is right meaning skillful, not ignorant, conducive to becoming a wiser, more compassionate person. So the question of how we speak and how we listen for the Buddha is tied up with our enlightenment, with our awakening. It's not just a matter of not being rude to people, because we all know that already. Now the Buddha's not suggesting we go around being rude to people, but he's saying, let's go a bit more deeply in understanding this issue. So when I speak, I can be aware of how I'm speaking. When I'm listening, I can be aware of how I'm listening. In a sense, I'm listening to myself even when I'm speaking. So at the moment, I'm listening to myself as I speak to you. So I'm raising my own awareness. Now presumably, as you're listening to me, you're aware of how you're listening to me. You're aware that you are listening to me, which raises certain questions about what is going on when you're listening or what is going on when I'm speaking. To take one obvious thing, I could be speaking from my own personal agenda. I could have ulterior motives. If I look into myself, maybe I'll spot what those are. Or maybe I need someone else to point them out, in which case I should be a good listener and accept that what people say about me may be true or partially true, and do something about that. And when you're listening to me, you may be listening with an agenda. You may have certain views of your own already. You may have some aspects of your personality, or your selfhood, if you like, which you wish to defend because of things that have happened in your life, or the way you're treated by others, or all sorts of reasons. We all grow up with an inheritance from the past. We all grow up in families. We grow up in a society with certain views, etc. And we also, all of us, learn strategies for coping with life, given our own abilities and disabilities. So the Buddha's approach to people's behavior is to say, this is how this person has grown, and some of that growth may be harmful to him and others, and some of it may be beneficial. But how do we know unless we learn the art of being aware or mindful of our own speaking and listening? Let's look at this afresh. In the classical teachings, you'll see that the Buddha is presented as drawing attention, or helping us to draw attention to our manner of speaking and listening, in terms of our attitude, in terms of our intention, in terms of the truthfulness of what we're saying, the timeliness of what we're saying, and the manner in which we say it or receive it when we're told. It's quite a good little framework to start with. By attitude, I think we all understand what is meant. That my attitude is my predisposition to behave in certain ways, in certain situations, or react in certain patterns. So a pattern of reactions, if you like, or responses, constitutes an attitude. So I have an attitude. We all have a certain attitude. But we may not be aware of what that attitude is. So we may have an attitude which tends to defensiveness. We may have an attitude which tends to hostility. We may have an attitude which tends to kindliness and acceptance. But do we actually know as individuals what our attitude is? And if someone says, maybe somebody that actually likes me or even loves me says something about my attitude, how do I respond? Do I go immediately into a defensive position because I feel threatened? If I do that, of course, I don't learn anything. But with mindfulness, I'm trying to use my own inner resources to understand myself. I should always listen to others, but I can always look honestly, this is not particularly easy, but honestly, at my own attitudes. So it's like looking in a mirror. If I look in a mirror, I know whether I'm tall or short. I know whether I'm dark or light. I know whether I've got long hair or short hair. I know whether I'm in my 20s or in my 60s. Right? It's there. Well, could we do the same sort of thing with our attitude? Can I sort of hold up an internal mirror and say, oh right, well this is how I am. Now, just as if you look in a mirror and might not like some of the things that you see, think, well, there's another wrinkle there, or more hair has fallen out, or whatever it is. Now, it's the same with looking into myself. Some of the things I find I might not like, and I could just try to patch them up or deny them. And some of the things I find I might think, well, actually that's quite a good quality that I have there. That's something I should nurture, and I should respect, even if other people ridicule it sometimes. For example, if you're a kind person, you will encounter people that ridicule that as being some sort of weakness. But then you have to have the strength to say to yourself, well, why are they ridiculing kindliness? Isn't there, maybe they have an issue which maybe they need to confront, but I'm going to remain kind. Attitude then is the background of the whole way I speak and listen. When I speak, generally, I am expressing my attitude. A cynical person will speak cynically. A resentful person will speak resentfully. A kindly person will speak kindly. A helpful person will speak helpfully. A manipulative person will speak manipulatively. Isn't that right? It will colour, I'm not saying, every single word, but it's going to colour the general drift of their speaking. Now, it's the same with our listening. Don't think for a moment that listening is a passive business. It's not. It's an active business of interpreting and selecting what you're hearing. We may be bored by what somebody is saying to us. We may be excited by what they're saying. Why are we bored with this and we're excited with that? What are we trying to do? What are we're sifting, we're selecting, we're interpreting, and that is tied up with our attitude. There's an attitude behind our listening. When two people communicate, it's really quite interesting. If you record it and then play it back, you can often sense that there's some sort of game going on. Sometimes we're trying, if we meet a person for the first time, we're actually trying to kind of locate them or position them in terms of how important they are, whether they're useful to me, whether I should respect them according to some criteria laid down by society. All of this is going on, but it's quite implicit. It's not something that I'm generally aware of. But with mindfulness, I've got something else I can work on now, which is how I'm speaking and how I'm listening, so I can become much more aware. It isn't easy because a lot of it is habitual and implicit. So if you take the business of how far do I place myself in relation to another person. So if I were talking to Gordon, who's sitting next to me, at this space, that would be acceptable. If I move a foot nearer, well, that's still acceptable. What if I start getting right up to his face? He's going to start backing off now, isn't he? Why? What is the acceptable distance for talking to somebody? And how do we learn that? Did anyone ever tell us? Did mum and dad ever say to you, when you're speaking to someone, don't approach closer than 9.5 inches? No, of course not. This shows us that many of the things we learn, perhaps the most important things we learn, are sort of absorbed. They're imbibed without any conscious planning or information about that. It's implicit. So that feeling of discomfort I have when somebody starts approaching up to here, now it depends on the circumstances. If it were my wife, well, I think, well, that's perfectly normal. But if it were Gordon, I would think, what's going on? And my mind is sort of swirling as to what is it that's going on. It's the same, actually, with all our communication. Because, of course, bodily movements, gesture, all of that is part of communication. Speaking is not the only form of communication. Facial movements, gestures, all of it is a form of communication. When I speak, my attitude reveals itself through my face, through my choice of words, and so on. So one thing we can ask ourselves, the Buddha's just giving us a little lift here, saying, if you're going to start being mindful of your speaking and listening, think about your general attitude. Now, a warning needs to be put out straight away about this. This is not an instrument for judging other people. This is an instrument for learning about yourself. So once we hear about right speech for the first time, we don't go around saying to each other, you're not observing right speech, are you? Right? Why did you say that? That's not the intention of it. Right? So we really oughtn't do that. What we're doing is providing you with, if you like, a subjective tool to develop your own awakening, your own wisdom and compassion, your understanding of your place in the whole scheme of things. Speaking is such an object. Attitude, intention. When you say a particular thing, what are you intending to do with the thing that you've said? Are you intending to winkle out information from a person? And why? Is it because you want to know whether they're working class or middle class? Or is it because you want to know whether they have an education or not? Is it because really I want to position myself in relation to that person? We do a lot of this. I mean, we human beings are very hierarchical, actually. And we do this largely habitually. So we're not terribly aware of it. But we do it. And if we are if we're more aware of our intention, then that will make us a wiser person. It will give us more freedom in choices we make about how we speak. I didn't know I could be kind. I thought everybody had to be rude to each other. It's a message I get from a lot of the media and watching TV. There was a young person on TV the other day, I think it was a program about homelessness or something like that, and he was about 17, 18, and he'd had quite a rough life, family life and so on, and he'd been brought up in such a way that lying was natural. Everybody lied, and he lied, and because he'd come into contact with a different way of life, he saw for the first time that you didn't have to lie. He thought you had to. He thought it was normal. Everyone tells lies all the time because where he came from, it was all manipulation. So it was all lies. He would never tell the truth about anything, really. He would always embellish it or leave things out. Except for it was like a flash of lightning to him to suddenly realise you could actually live a life without telling lies, and that it might be better in many ways if you lived your life in that way. You see, because from where he was coming from, he just took it for granted that telling the truth is disadvantageous. So don't tell the truth. Always tell a lie where you can. Now, that's another part of the Buddha's teaching. So we've got attitude, we've got intention, we've got truth. Now, the Buddha was a smart guy, you know. He didn't go around saying, you have to do this, you have to do that. And surprisingly, it's the same, surprisingly for some people, it's the same with truth. He doesn't say, tell the truth in all contexts, whatever the situation, just blurt out the truth. Well, of course, he's got to balance that against other things. That's what wisdom is, balance. You could tell the truth in such a way that it's hurtful or even harmful. You could kill somebody by telling the truth. You've got to weigh it up. Of course, there is, to use a lawyer's phrase, there is a presumption in favour of telling the truth. That is, assume that you do tell the truth, unless there might be some circumstances in which you leave it till later, for example. But on the whole, we have to say that in the Buddha's teaching, truth is very, very important. The reason it's important is that you cannot be mindful if you're not honest with yourself. If you can't look at your own experience and say, this is how things are, like it or not, this is how things are, then there's no progress to be made at all. So truth is really is a fundamental value in the Buddha's teaching, but that doesn't mean that you're not sensitive to context. So that brings us to, for example, timeliness, which is mentioned in the teachings. That telling the truth waits on time, that you could tell the truth at the wrong time. You could think of scenarios, couldn't you? Where, let's say somebody's in a hospital bed. I'm trying to think on my feet here. Say they're in a hospital bed, their spouse is they've just had an accident, their spouse has just been killed in this accident, they're suffering in the bed. Are you going to tell them right now that their spouse has just died? If they're asking, maybe, but you see, I have to think. Maybe this is not the time. Maybe let them get over the shock and the distress they're already in from the accident itself. It could wait a little while. Is that wrong? Or is that kind? You're not going to tell them lies. You're not going to cover up, but you're just balancing up the fact that maybe, there are times when we need to consider receptivity to the truth. It's often been said that truth is one of the hardest things to bear. and that we human beings are not particularly keen on the truth. Which is perhaps why we're sitting around this room learning together, is because of that. We'd perhaps rather be in a fantasy, or we'd rather live with pleasure and entertainment all the time. But the truth will out, as they say, is an English saying, isn't it? The truth will out. The truth will appear sooner or later. So it's better to accommodate to it as one goes along. So when you look in the mirror and there is another wrinkle on your face, so say, well, there's another wrinkle on my face. Okay, so what? It's a fact of life. One gets older. And I won't try to be 25 any longer. I'll accept the age that I am. It's rather sad, isn't it, really, at a certain point? Seeing our struggle against aging, it's rather sad, actually, but perfectly understandable, because we don't like the truth. So right speech is also about telling the truth, but with other considerations, so that it's not just the bare truth, it's the truth wisely told. But then listening as well. When we listen, are we actually picking up the truth in what someone is saying, or are we just picky? You say, well, dismiss that because I don't like the sound of that. I don't like it and I'll reject it because it is the truth, perhaps. So, timeliness is also important. And finally, the manner in which one speaks. Let's say everything else was in place, right? I've just gone to a meeting at work and we're all discussing some really thorny issue and we're all trying to be, honest about the situation. And there's one thing that hasn't been said. The elephant in the room. You know that situation? The elephant's still sitting in the room and nobody seems to notice this elephant. Attitudes are okay, people's intentions are fine, they really want to solve the problem, whatever it is. So, they want to be truthful and so on. And then I think, right, I'm going to tell the truth. And I'm going to draw attention to the elephant. The manner in which I do it is really critical now, because there's a reason why it's an elephant in the room. It's because it's painful to have to face it. So now you're in a delicate situation. If I just blurt it out or make other people feel they're foolish, or should have thought of it before, or should have acted on it, and that I am the one who knows this, and I'm the clever chap who's going to tell you all about it, what are you going to get? You're going to get a pretty severe reaction of defensiveness. Because, fear is one of our motivating factors. And we all will react if anything makes us feel threatened or fearful. So the manner in which I raise it, I've got to think a moment and I've got to put it over in a way that it's our problem or it's our issue and that maybe this is something we should consider. So we just put out some little feelers towards the elephant. Just stroke its paws perhaps for a while and then get hold of the tail. But just to throw it right in the middle, in a supercilious way, I'm the person that's seen this and the rest of you haven't because you're foolish, that is not going to help at all, even though it is the truth that you're telling. So there's quite a lot, isn't there? Now, the reason we're going through this, these 5 dimensions, and of course there are more than 5, is that the Buddha's just helping us. He's giving us sort of a map of what it is to become aware of our speaking and listening. Now, you need to go on from there. And the key thing, of course, is being truthful with yourself. That's the tricky part. But that is what the Buddha is asking us to do, to be truthful with ourselves. Because only that way can you be wise or compassionate. You can never attain any wisdom or compassion or peacefulness where you're not being fully truthful with yourself. Isn't that true? I think we all know that, really.
New Buddha Way approaches meditation as a way of life, letting go of east and west, past and future, and starting afresh here and now. To find out more, visit www.newbuddhaway.org.